In this video, I'm just going to be walking through the finance project that you're being asked to do on Google Classroom this week. We're just going to be going through some of the details, kind of some general ideas. I'm not going to be walking you through every tiny little detail and every little step because this is an opportunity for you to show what you know. But I do want to make sure that I'm making sure that everything's clear and maybe giving a few pointers here and there as well. Of course, always start by making sure that you're reading all of the instructions. I've tried to put enough in here in the text already that you wouldn't necessarily need the extra video, but it is here as a resource, and I want you to use that because it offers kind of those essential pieces of information. All right. Notice here, as we take a look at this, there is a little bit of information about grading. There are going to be two components to how I score you as actually having done this assignment. The first is just, are you actually fulfilling the requirements of the assignment? And so, like, did you answer each of the questions completely? Things like that. The second part is the mathematical part, where I'm going to be looking to see, did you do and did you show the correct math? And yes, you need to show the math where it's being asked for in order for me to give you credit for having done the math. So the first section here is just asking about your career. And the great part is this really is just taking a look at what you want to do in your own career. And so you're just going to write in whatever it is that you want your career to be down here. Now try to make it something reasonable. If you have never played a game of football in your life, please do not put down that you're going to be an NFL quarterback. I want this to be something that's actually useful for you. And so actually think that through and think about what it is really likely for where you're heading, because this is going to give you some really good perspective about what that's going to look like. All right, and then you're going to take that career that you identified in number one, and that's the career you're going to be using throughout the whole assignment here. And you're then going to do an internet search, and you're going to try to figure out what the median annual income is of your career. So for instance, if you decide that you want your career to be a mechanic, then you would say median annual income of mechanic. And it's going to give you a lot of data when you do that. And so then the first thing you need to do is sort through that data and look through the internet search results. Most likely you're going to be getting a range of values where you might see something where it might say 30K to 50K or something like that in terms of those search results. And you could use multiple pages. Don't always just assume that the first thing that comes up is your best result. But if you are looking at something like this where you're looking at a range, what I would suggest you do is pick a value that makes the most sense. We need to just use a single number for our work in this particular assignment. So you need to boil that range down to one number. Now, if you know that you're going to be at the top of your career because you're going into this really hard to find for employees kind of part of the career, then you might want to be picking the top end of the range. If you just want to make sure that it's a job where you just show up each day, don't necessarily put any extra time or energy into it, you might be looking at more the lower range of that salary range. Or more likely, you might just be saying, well, I'm guessing I'll be someplace in the middle. And so like in this particular range, I might have said 40,000, since 40 is right between the 30 and the 50 there. But do pick just a single number, because whatever number it is that you pick, that's going to be that annual income that we're going to be referencing back to a lot in this assignment. All right, and then the last thing we need to know up front here about your career is what age you expect to begin working in this career. So if it's something where you are already prepped to do and you've already had all the training and you're going to go and start doing it next year, then put down your age next year. If you need to go to college and you need a 4-year degree, for instance, before you can start it, well, then think about when you graduate and then go 4 years out past that in order to be able to figure out what age you'll be when you would expect to be working in this career. And of course, those numbers will vary depending on what kind of schooling or training you do need. So just account for that as you put that into your calculations. And the first thing we're going to be doing with this is a little bit of retirement planning. And so the first question here, if we're going to do some retirement planning, we have to know what age you expect to be retiring. And so we're just going to be deciding what age we're going to be using for your retirement age. And you might actually want to put some thought into this. How long do you want to be working? How long do people tend to have to work? And you could even do more internet searches for this sort of stuff if you want to, so that you can have that perspective. in terms of if you're wondering, well, I want to go the earliest I can, we're actually going to come back to that question a little bit later in this assignment. So you could actually save that particular piece, and we'll actually figure out what age that could possibly be if you do that problem. Now, once you know what this age is, now I'm just going to grab a number here. Let's say we decide that we're going to retire at age 60. Then that would be the number that I'm going to be using when I go here and do number 5. All right, so for 5A, it says, what is 15% of the annual income you found earlier? Now, earlier, we had talked about how we'd have that range. I had talked about, well, in this particular example I've been talking about, I might have ended up using 40,000 as my number, because 40K is going to be 40,000. And so this question is asking, what is 15% of that? And so all you have to do is figure out 15% of it. Now remember, if I want to figure out what the percent of a number is, I first turn that percent into a decimal by dividing it by 100. And so 15% is 0.15. If I want to know what 15% of something is, of means multiply. And so I'd be multiplying that 40,000 by that 0.15 to be able to get that answer. And then that's all I have to do for A. Then on to B. Given the age when you plan to start your career, so like let's say we decided we're going to start at age 20, and the age you expect to retire, I had thrown out the idea of maybe using 60 there, how many years will you be working? So notice if I started when I was 20 and I was going to stop when I was 60, then that would be a grand total of 40 years. All we have to do is subtract those two numbers there to be able to get that. All right, part C. We're doing another internet search on this one. In this case, we're going to search and try to figure out the average return for money invested in the stock market. And you could even actually just type it in that way. You could also type in stock market return or stock market average. There's lots of different searches that will come up with this. And depending on which results you use, you might get different answers. There's not just a single right answer for this because, for instance, the average return over the last 5 years is different than the average return for the last 30 years. And so you would think about, okay, well, which number do I want to use? And a few considerations with this. The longer the period is that you're looking at, the more an average tends to represent a long-term goal. But it also means that it might also include a lot more different events that came up, which is either both a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. Like if you were doing just a 1-year average and you included this year with the coronavirus outbreak, it would give a very different feel for the way the stock market behaves than if you had done a 1-year average that included last year or a 2-year average that included this year and last year. It'd help balance it out. So just consider some of those things as you look at those numbers. But whatever the internet search turns up and the one that you feel the best about, you're going to put that number in here. Now I'm just going to make up a number. Let's say it told me that it was 9.5%. Okay. Then I would head on to part D there. And in part D, it says if you invested 15% of your annual income, so again, you're going to go back to that annual income and grab the 15%. In other words, this number right here, 15% of your annual income, that is the number that you found up here in part A. So if we invest that amount of money during the first year of our career, and it earned the stock market average of return, so here is our stock market average return, that is whatever number you found in part C, how much would it be worth when you retired? So when you retired, that is after this many years. It's after B. So A, B, and C are giving you the numbers that you're going to need to know for answering part D. Now, how would you figure it out? This goes back to that general exponential equation that we know, right? That A of t equals P times 1 plus R to the power of t. And the hint that I'm going to give you, I'm not going to walk you through this one in detail, but the hint I'm going to give you is that each of these 3 variables are numbers that we found already. So those 3 numbers are up above there in parts A, B, and C. It's just a matter of figuring out which one goes where and how to use it. So use those to find your answer for part D. All right, now on to the next question, number 6. Oh, and just in case I decide I wanted to edit this assignment later, if you notice, like I say this is number 6 and all of a sudden on your assignment it's become number 7, I might have made a few edits after this fact. And if that's the case, well, then just roll with it. I'm only going to make the video once. All right, so in number 6, uh, I did a little bit of internet research myself, and there's a little bit of difference. You know, some people say one thing, some people said another, but 80% was a good number to use. So I went with the 80% here, where financial advisors say you need to earn 80% of your pre-retirement income when you're retired. And so we're going to be here in part A dealing with that. What is 80% of your annual income? Well, remember earlier we had found that our annual income that we were expecting was about 40,000 in our particular example here. And so we would be looking to say, what is 80% of that? Remember in the last problem, we figured out what 15% of that amount was? Same thing here, just this time you're going to figure out what is 80%. All right, and then that's going to give us some number here. Now, I'm not going to do that calculation. I'm going to make up a number here, and I'm purposefully making up a different number because I want you actually having to go and do this calculation yourself. So I'm going to say, let's say that this number is going to be 30,000. And no, that does not match up with my 40,000 number. It would not be the correct answer. But I want to have that number handy because I'm going to be using it in part B. Because the other part of our intro question was that we should expect to get a return of 4% on our investment income while we are retired. So what that means is that however much we have saved when we are retired, we should be able to take out about 4% of that per year as income. Because let's say we have $1 million invested in a retirement account, then if I take 4% of that, then it's still growing while it's invested, but we also need to be able to pull some out. So that way, if we pull out 4%, we keep our total savings from decreasing. That way we never are going to run out of money. We'll always have enough to be able to live on. All right, so that's what question B is all about here. We're going to figure out how much we need to have saved for retirement. That means we need 4% of our savings to equal 80% of the annual income. All right, now we already know what 80% of the annual income is. That is what we did up here in part A. So you're going to take that number, and so we need it equal to that. And so what do we need equal to that? We need 4% of your savings to equal that. Well, remember 4%, I turned that into a decimal, so that means that 4% would become 0.04. And we want to say that we're going to be doing 0.04 times our savings. I'm going to use S for savings there. Notice, I set up an equation there that I could use now to solve it. And of course, yours will look different depending on what numbers you're using there. And then in part C, we're actually going to figure out what that amount is. So in other words, part C is saying, solve the equation from part B. And for this one, you'll notice that I'm specifically telling you that I want you to either type in the work or include a picture here. I want to see your math work. So this is one of those problems where you will be graded on the math itself as well. So show the steps, and you can either type them in or you can write them out on paper and then take a picture and put that picture in here. Whatever works best for you. It is up to you, because I know typing math into a computer can sometimes feel awkward, but on the other hand, at least if you're like me, after putting in the time to actually do it, I sure like the results and how it looks, because it sure is very nice and neat. But it is up to you about which method you use. Right now, we go on to number 7. And when you look at number 7, the first thing you're probably seeing and noticing here is this big old formula. And yes, it looks scary when we first look at it, but the nice part is it actually is very close to something you've already used before, so it's not going to be too foreign. All right, so let's read our problem here. You probably noticed that the amount that you needed for retirement when we just solved the last problem is more than what we had saved if we had invested that 15% the first year. That's because when those financial advisors, they suggest contributing that 15% every year. You don't just do it 1 year and then you're done. You have to keep investing. And so the formula that we've been using in class for compounding interest, it's always geared around just investing once and being done. So we don't do anything more with that particular investment. Well, if we invested 15% the first year, I could do that formula once. But then if I invested again the second year, I'd have to do that formula all over again. If we were working, say, 40 years, we'd have to do this formula 40 times in order to figure out the total amount that we'd have at the end of those 40 years because we continue contributing. And so we're going to get around that here. This is what we call an annuity, which is where we continue to make contributions, and those are continuing to grow with compounding interest over time. Now, this equation, I'm giving it to you in the assignment because this is not one I expect you to memorize. This is one that I expect you to be able to use by plugging numbers into it, but that's because I expect you to be able to plug numbers into any kind of formula and be able to use them. But I do want us to use it for this here. The only thing that's different about this formula from the ones that we previously used in terms of the variables, you'll notice it's A of t, we got a c, r, and we got an n in the equation. The thing that we're missing here is the c. What does the c actually mean? And so that's what this is about down here. C is the annual contribution amount. And so that's what that's going to be talking about. One other thing in this formula, I'm actually thinking I might go change it in your actual assignment, so this might look different by the time you're doing the assignment, is there's an n here in the formula. That's exactly the same as t. And so I'll probably just make that t and go back and do an edit there. But do realize that that should be to the power of time. It's however long we've left the investment in there. All right, so part A here. You are going to be using this formula to calculate how much you'd save if you contributed that exact same 15%, which we calculated earlier, but this time we're going to do that every year. So that 15%, that's going to be our C value. I want you to just plug all of the numbers into that equation and see what will that give you as a final answer. I do want to, again, see your math work on this one. So show your work, write it all out. I want to be able to see the work that you're doing and plugging it into this new formula. As you do so, use the correct order of operations. As I look at this and try to foresee any questions that might come up along the way, the one that I know some people might ask me is, what's the difference between the square brackets and the parentheses? Nothing. The square brackets just work like parentheses. The reason why there's square brackets there instead of parentheses is because inside of it, there's a set of parentheses, and oftentimes, just to make it a little bit easier to be able to differentiate between what set of parentheses goes with what, sometimes we'll use the different symbol just to be able to add some variation and make them visually different, but they mean the same thing mathematically. So when doing part A, use PEMDAS, your order of operations. Okay, and then for part B, it talks about how many people do neglect to work on their retirement savings when they start working. And that definitely does tend to be the case because you start working, you really want to be spending all that money you're making. But it's often not the best choice. In fact, what you'll find is that if you start your retirement contributions right away when you start working, it seems so far off. But if you do it then, you will be finding yourself in a much better position. And we're going to figure out exactly how much better of a position here, because part B says you're going to be making the exact same contributions. The only difference is that we're going to say, well, what if we had already been working for 10 years? So it's going to be changing our T value up here. And so, for instance, earlier I'd been using the example where we would be working 40 years. If we had been working 40 years, what this question is saying is, okay, it's no longer 40, it's now going to be 30. It's going to be 10 years less. So redo the work you did for part A, but use a number for time that is 10 years less than what you're using there in part A. And then you can compare those two numbers and see how they are going to look. And again, yes, I want to see your math work here, so show me the work you're doing in order to be able to get that answer. All right, now this one is the bonus question. You do not actually have to do this problem, but if you do, it's worth bonus points. It's also a very useful question. In fact, this is one of the most useful questions that you might see out of the whole assignment, because oftentimes we wonder not how long should I work because I want to keep working, but oftentimes people want to know how long do I have to work. So based on all these numbers, you're going to then solve the equation for the t value. So you're going to put in your final amount that you found that you should have for savings, and then you're going to solve the equation for n. I had written it in terms of n. As I said, I'm probably going to go back and I'm going to change that to be t. It's the exact same place in the formula. It's just figuring out, okay, what's the time value that we need to go through there? And that's all the detail I'm going to give for this bonus question, because it is a bonus question. And I want you to be able to have that chance to show exactly what you know there. All right, next up, we're going to be taking a look at housing. And that's because one of the biggest single expenses that you will ever have is buying a house. Very expensive to buy a house. And so not everybody buys a house either. Many people rent their whole lives, and there's some good reasons to do that as well. But I do want us to take a look and see what happens with the numbers if we do choose to buy. So what I'm going to have you do first is you're going to go do another one of those internet searches, and you're going to find a house for sale that you think you might like to own as an adult. Now, of course, I know that that house will probably not be for sale when you actually go to buy a house. And that's not the point of this. We want to see how much would the type of house that you want cost. And as you do that, also think about location. Don't say, I want a huge house, and then decide, okay, I'm going to go live in Wyoming, when you have absolutely zero interest in living in Wyoming. You want to stay here where your family is, for instance. Make sure that you are considering the area where you'd be living. So if you want a huge house and you want to live in Bothell, be looking for huge houses in Bothell. But I think you'll probably quickly decide maybe you don't need a huge one. Maybe a medium-sized one will be good. It all depends, because you really do want to think about the price of this. Because as we're going to go forward with this, you're going to see just how much this particular house that you choose here in number 9 is going to cost you. So all you got to do in your answer for number 9 is just tell me, what is that house value that you found during your internet search? Like, what's its list price? All right, number 10, another internet search. What is the annual home appreciation rate in the city where you're planning on living? So if you are going to be hoping to still live in Bothell area, then search for the annual home appreciation rate in Bothell. This is the percent by which houses are going up by, what the price of houses is going up by every single year. Because as house prices increase, we want to be able to know, what will that house that we saw the price for today cost us later? And that's what number 11 is going to start looking at here. We want to be able to figure out how much would that house cost in 10 years. And so in order to figure that out, we are going to be using the home appreciation rate up here. That is actually going to be the R value in the equation that we have been using all along, our compounding interest equation. And we'll be using our house value when doing that as well. That house value, that's our starting value. And so that's going to be our P value. And so notice there you have all of the necessary components to use our compounding interest equation. So go ahead and use that equation there in number 11. And again, show your math work. Yes, I do want to see your work that you're doing on that. Number 12 now. In number 12, we're going to take that future value of the house that you just found, so the value of the house in 10 years, so that's the one that you're more likely to be paying, because you're not buying it today. You're more likely to be buying a house in 10 years. We're going to use that number and figure out what your monthly payments will actually be. There's all sorts of great calculators online that tell you some of this information. And one of those is this particular one that I've linked here. Go ahead and use this particular mortgage calculator just because I found it to be a little simpler to use. It doesn't have tons of extra stuff on the page that you don't need and that you don't care about. And we're going to be using this one to figure it out. Now, when we do that, we want to specifically use the 20% down payment and the 30-year fixed mortgage option. Now, when you do this, this is what the page is going to look like that you go to. Now, for this particular example, you'll notice that I had input a home value of 300,000. I'm betting the home value you used was probably more than that. But I just went ahead and used 300,000 there. Now, as soon as I did that, it automatically calculated the down payment to be 20%. So you shouldn't have to change anything there. I did have to change this number though. I had to change that to 30-year fixed. So make sure to choose that because we want to see how much it would cost if we got a 30-year fixed rate mortgage on this. That is the standard loan that most people use when buying a house, especially their first house. Now, if you can get into the place in life where you can make it a 15-year mortgage instead, all the better. That whole option at the bottom that you saw in the same drop-down menu of 5/1 ARM, my personal advice is avoid the ARM. It avoids the adjustable rate mortgage because odds are the rates are going to be going up, especially right now. And when I input that information, it automatically calculated this interest rate for me. Basically, it went out and figured out what is a prevailing rate on the market right now. And so it went ahead and did that research for you. That's why I chose to use this particular site because it made it very easy for you to look at and see. And then the output information is this stuff over here that we want. And notice it actually gives us 4 different numbers. And I'm going to be asking for each of the, well, most of those 4. This big number that it shows you here is the total monthly payment. So when we ask about what's the grand total, including everything, that's the number we're looking at. But the actual mortgage value, the actual value that just includes the principal and the interest, this is the part the bank is really caring about, is that number. This big number that we saw here, it's actually going to be all 3 of these added up together. And so that's what that's all about. One other thing that I will add into this is that on this page, it does also give you this here. Want to keep these numbers for later? Send yourself the results. Give us your email. You do not need to give them your email, okay? And I don't see any reason why you would need to, and you certainly do not have to. So do not worry about sending them your email information. Please just skip that part. You can see everything that you need to know displayed right up there on the screen. All right, so with that information, you're going to then be able to answer part A because that's just reading it off the website. You're going to be able to answer part B. That is just reading it off the website. And then part C, well, you will have to do a little math for this because A and B are giving you your monthly payments. That's what you have to pay every single month. Part C, I'm asking you to then figure out how much would your total then be for what you're paying for this house each year. So you're going to take your monthly total. That's going back to part B basically there. You're going to be taking your monthly total and you're going to be turning that into a yearly number. So figure out how much would that total be for the entire year. All right, next up, we're going to be taking a look at inflation because inflation is going to enter this into all these calculations as well. We're skipping over some of the details about that because we could include inflation for every single year and how that's affecting some of these values as well. And certainly when you go and do more of this planning on your own, include some of that additional information, but I'm wanting to kind of get you settled with some of the ideas behind this first. Because inflation is this whole idea of, yes, money is going up, your income is going up, for instance, each year, things like that, but so do costs. Like housing costs go up, but they don't always match inflation. But like the cost of a loaf of bread, it goes up over time. There's a lot of things that, for instance, in maybe the 1960s that you could buy for a dime now cost you over $1. That's inflation. And so we're going to be looking to see what kind of impact inflation has on some of these numbers. The piece of information from the top part up here that you need to know is that the average rate of inflation is about 3.5% per year. And that's at least the average number that we're going to be using here. All right, so based on that, we want to be able to figure out then, what would your annual income be in 10 years? So 10 years from now, that median income that you found at the very start of this project will have changed. At least we would certainly hope that it would have changed. And we're going to see how it would have changed just based off of inflation. So take that annual income you found earlier and figure out what will happen if it goes up by 3.5% per year for 10 years. Notice we have all the information we need there in order to be able to use our standard compounding interest equation. Yes, I want to see your work on that. So make sure to show that to be able to get credit for showing and doing the math on that. All right. And then part B, how much would your annual income be when you retired? Now, this is going to change depending on what numbers you used. Basically, you need to figure out, based on how many years you thought you'd be working and when you thought you would start working, figure out what age would you be when you retired, and then figure out how many years is that past now to do this. Let's say earlier you decided that you would end up starting your current career, your career that you're going to be talking about going into here, at 20 years old. And let's say that you're going to try working for 40 years. That would mean that you're going to retire at 60. So age 60, you'd be retiring. Okay, we need to figure out how many years that is from now. So let's say that you are currently 17 years old. If you are currently 17 and you're going to retire when you are 60, that would tell us then that you are going to be wanting to retire 43 years from now. And so then that means that you're going to be doing the same kind of work you did back in part A, except instead of using 10, you're going to be using 43 for your time value, because that's how many years will have elapsed during which inflation can grow and affect that value. And then we hit number 14. And in number 14, it's going to ask you what your new target number is that you will need to have invested. There are two ways you can do this particular calculation. One is you can do it kind of like you did part B, except instead of using your income number, you could use your retirement target number. The other option is that you could actually use your answer from part B, but I'm not going to tell you exactly how yet, but I will say it's something you did earlier in this project. All right, and finally, I do want you to give me a paragraph about what you learned from this project, because my real hope with doing this particular project is that you will have learned something about how retirement planning works, what you should expect as you look toward retirement, what you can expect based on the income that you're looking at. There's a lot of little details like that. Maybe you learn something about housing and how much that really costs. I just want to know, what did you really get out of this assignment, so that you can reflect on that and maybe have something you can remember going forward as well. And plus, I want to know what you got out of it. I want to know what really had a good impact here, and the hope that maybe this is a project that I'll decide to continue using with other classes or something like that. But I really want to know, what did you get out of it? So just write a paragraph. It doesn't have to be a long paragraph. I'm hoping it's not a super short paragraph. If it's one sentence, I don't consider that a paragraph. But just give me a paragraph about what you learned. It should be a little bit of detail. Don't just say, I learned that retirement costs a lot, and that's like your whole answer or something. No, it'd be more like, well, I realized that in order to save enough for retirement, I have to be planning ahead, and that means I need to do this, or maybe some action that you decided based on some of these numbers, like, okay, well, I did say this at the start, but now I'm thinking I'm going to change this. So, some different piece of information that might help along the way. Just whatever you want it to be, though, just give me some detail.